Hi, welcome to A Gray Barn Rising. I'm sitting here this evening with Bootsy Beagle, the best hound dog in the world, and I'm reading the poems of the Mexican writer Rosario Castellanos, who lived from 1925 to 1974. She has exerted a profound impact and influence on Mexican letters, particularly through her introduction of feminism to Mexican literature. She's considered one of the primary, if not the primary, forces of feminist writing in Mexican culture, and not only through her poetry, but through her stories, her novels, her essays, and many people, men and women alike, point to her as one of the greatest influences of introducing that element of greater humanity and equality into Mexican literature. One of the things that I find extraordinarily fascinating about Rosario Castellanos is not only her deep social conscience, which really comes through in her poems, but the way that social conscience is layered with a kind of mysticism that I believe she inherited, and other critics have cited this as well, that she inherited from her living in the southern part of Mexico among the Mayan population. She was born in Mexico City, but she grew up in the southern part of Mexico around indigenous populations. And the sense of interconnection and cosmic interplay seems to inhabit her poems and bring a different layer to her element of social awareness. And I hope that some of the poems that I've chosen to share with you this evening exhibit that, because I think that that's so unique in her work. Her poems have great range in style and in length, and I've chosen this evening to read more of her shorter, distilled poems. I love the intensity of these, and so I want to share some of these with you. This first poem is entitled The Farewell. Let me speak one word, muzzle, to say goodbye to what I love. The earth escapes, flies like a bird. Its flight draws round, wakes in the air, fresh tracks of aroma and signs of trills. Everything travels on the wind, ravished. Ah, to be a kerchief, only a white kerchief. This is entitled Nocturne, and she has a couple poems entitled Nocturne. I want to share this one with you. I lay down like a plane so the wind would howl. For one whole night I was the sight of his rage and grief. Who else has known a slavery like this? A master more dread. Here, in my barrenness, I bear the print of his unreturning foot. The ending to that poem is so powerful, to bear the print of something that is unreturning. I love the oddity of that, but it's paradox. It's so true. And let me go ahead and give you another poem of hers entitled Nocturne. Time is too long for life, for knowledge not enough. What have we come for? Night, heart of night. All we can do is dream or die. Dream that we do not die, and at times, for a moment, wake. That sense of momentariness for her, I think, is very significant when she says, for a moment. And I think part of the power of her work is the compression of her poems and the focus on often a single situation as greater resonance. It also encapsulates that element of for a moment. That moment, of course, becomes elongated and large and very, very profound in a Rosario Castellanos poem. warning to whomever comes. Don't touch my left arm. It hurts from all the scars. They say it was a suicide attempt, but all I wanted was to sleep, long and deep, the way a happy woman sleeps. Chess. Because we were friends and occasionally lovers. Perhaps to add another interest to the many that already bound us, we decided to play games of wit. We placed a board between us, evenly dividing pieces, values, possible moves. We learned the rules, swore to respect them, and began the match. We've been sitting here for a century, meditating furiously on how to deal the final blow that once and for all will irremediably and forever annihilate the other. Here's a poem of hers that actually, I want to share this poem with you before the other one that I was going to read. I'll get to that one. This is called Indifference. He looked at me as one looks through a window, or the air, or nothing. And then I knew I was not there, or anywhere, nor had I ever been or would be. I became like one who dies in an epidemic, unidentified, and is hurled into a common grave. And this poem is a poem that I think for her is even more personal. The emotions she's expressed are deeply personal, deeply human of the poems I've read for you thus far. But in this poem, I think she moves even further into the personal in very interesting ways. This is called Speaking of Gabriel. Like all guests, my son got in the way, taking up a space that was my space, existing at all the wrong times, making me divide each bite in two. Ugly, sick, bored, I felt him grow at my expense, steal the color from my blood, add clandestine weight and volume to my way of being on the earth. His body begged for birth, begged me to let him pass, allot him his place in the world and the portion of time he needed for his history. I agreed, and through the wound of his departure, through the hemorrhage of his breaking free, the last I ever felt of solitude, of myself looking through a pane of glass, also slipped away. I was left open, an offering to visitations, to the wind, to presence. I love the closing of that poem, that we arrive at presence. I'm not sure I expected that as I was moving through the poem. And I like that in a Rosario Castellanos poem, how she will distill the moment so deeply and arrive at an outcome that we often do not expect, as that happens for me in that poem. Let me give you a couple more. This is entitled Daybreak. What does one do when it comes time to die? Turn one's face to the wall? Grab the shoulders of the person who is closest, who listens? Does one break into a run, like a man whose clothing is on fire, and make a dash to the finish? What ritual guides this ceremony? Who watches over the final agony? Who smooths the sheets? Who removes the last unclouded mirror? Because in the end, there is no mother and no heirs. There is no more sobbing, only a terrible silence. Everyone becomes the attentive, incredulous face of those on the other side. Because what is happening is not true. That's one of those Castellanos closing lines that just knocks me out. The whole idea of the time to die not being true is just marvelous, marvelous. And let me close this evening's reading of the poems of Rosario Castellanos with a poem entitled, "Poetry is Not You." Because if you existed, I'd have to exist too. And that's a lie. There is nothing more than ourselves, the couple, two sexes reconciled in a child, two heads together, not contemplating each other, so as not to turn either one into a mirror, but staring straight ahead at the other. The other, mediator, judge, equilibrium of opposites, witness, knot in which what was broken is retied. The other, muteness that begs a voice from the one who speaks and demands the ear of the one who listens. The other, with the other, humanity, dialogue, poetry, begin. I wanted to close with that poem because it really is emblematic of the power that Castellanos invests in the primacy of the poem, that the poem really is a dialogue. It moves well beyond an expression of emotion, well beyond an examination of feeling. It certainly is that, but in addition to that, it's also a dialogue. And this poem for me really moves out into community, which is very important for her feminist stance. So those are a few poems I read from Magda Bogan's translation of the selected poems of Rosario Castellanos. And as I mentioned, her poetry has a lot of breadth to it, and there are many different kinds of poems, different layers to her poetry. So I do hope you seek it out and read her work on your own. Thank you so much for joining Bootsy and me for another episode of A Gray Barn Rising.